last 15 years. I've also been a university professor off and on for about 10 years as an adjunct. So I've taught in different classes. And there's just two really, really quick rules that I have found. If we just follow these two rules, it's going to help us both get the most out of the day-to-day. So the very first rule is right now, this very second, I know that some of you are probably running some other application in front of you, whether it's your CRM, you've got your email open, you've got something else open. And so one of my rules that I've always told students is, look, if you're going to be here, let's be here. So let's focus on now. We can worry about all that other stuff later. So focus on now, worry about later. So if you happen to have your, some other application open, just go ahead and close that. If you need to, put your phone in airplane mode just so you don't get distracted by text messages. We've got about an hour, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you everything you can and that you're absorbing as much as you can in that hour. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is that, I grew up on the East Coast, and I don't know, I've been in the West Coast for about 15 years. People tell me I still got a little bit of an East Coast edge. So what that means is I'm very direct and sometimes a little bit blunt. And so what that means is, towards the end of the webinar, when I have a chance to take some Q&A, sometimes questions and they don't necessarily like the answers that I give them. And that's okay with me, because I'm just going to give you the answer that I think is the right answer. You might not like it, but that's okay. And also know that I tend, if you haven't noticed, I tend to speak kind of quickly. I try to slow things down if I can. This is just my natural rhythm, especially when I'm in teach mode. And so if you feel like I'm talking a little too fast, all I can say is write your notes faster, and know that I am recording this, and you can always go back and listen to the recording later on. So those are just the two rules. One is make sure you have no distractions. Let's focus on now and worry about later. And secondly, just know that I'm very direct. I speak really fast. I go really fast. We're going to cover a lot of content as much as we can, okay? So I also want to say a huge thank you to Ted King. So I know many of you on this webinar are here because of Ted King. He runs this fabulous group, the New York City EdTech Connect group, and Ted King is managing principal over Saddle Rack Advisors. And absolutely, positively, a huge thank you to Ted for letting everybody know that's on this call. Most of you are on this because you received an invitation from Ted via email because you're part of the EdTech Connect group. And if for some reason you got onto this webinar and you're not part of the EdTech Connect group, then absolutely, positively, I would recommend joining that group. So go over to you can see the website on the top, NewYorkCityEdTech.connect. If you just Google that, look for Ted King, you will find all the great stuff that he does for the EdTech community there in New York City and the northern New Jersey area. Okay, so big thank you to Ted. So what we're going to talk about today, how to land your next or maybe even your first 10 customers this fall. 3 strategies you can use right away for your EdTech startup. And so just to give you a little quick preview of what we're going to be covering is, one, I'm going to help you focus on your customers' strategic priorities so that you can build support from administration, executive level decision makers so that you can implement your solution much quicker. So that's one thing we're going to cover. Second thing we're going to cover is focusing on how to start small. How do you focus on starting small with your sales opportunities and then growing from there? And the third thing we're going to cover specifically is a strategy that I've used over and over that is absolutely one that you can deploy this fall, is pilot programs. So those are the 3 things that we're going to be covering today. One of the things I tell people is, look, I give you everything I can in the time that we've got. We've got about an hour. We might run a little bit over, and that's okay with me if it's okay with you. But, a lot of times people get to the end of this webinar and they go, oh man, that was really great. I'd like to get more help beyond what you just shared here in this webinar. And so at the end of the webinar, I'm going to show you, for those of you who want more help, I'm going to show you how to get it. Would that be okay? Hope that's okay with everyone. So let's do this. Let's hop in. So why this topic? Why do we want to talk about focusing on EdTech, and specifically, why do we want to focus on getting your next 10 or your first 10 customers this fall? Why this topic? Well, I mean, we just look at the calendar, right? We just hit September. We got Labor Day weekend coming up. And after Labor Day, you've got a really short window where you can do any kind of real selling to get anything in the door, cash-wise, revenue-wise, before the end of the year. Everybody knows the academic schedule. Everyone knows whether it's, you're selling to grade schools, high schools, universities, the corporate market, anything related to education. You know how things go, especially at the end of Q3 and into Q4. So in particular, what I wanted to do is cover this topic now to give you these strategies to shorten sales cycles, make sure that you're getting paid for the implementations that you're doing, and really start to ramp up and give you some proof and some confidence going into 2017 with your startup, with your product, with everything that you're doing, whether that means you need to go find more investors, whether you're trying to recruit, whether you're trying to get some better proof points around a minimal product that you might have built now with a much bigger roadmap down the road. So that's why I want to focus on this topic as a subject of this webinar. So a couple of other things that I think are really critical, and I've done a lot of research and I spend a lot of time working with startups. If you look around, just look around our startup ecosystem, right? There's all of this data, all this information, all these articles that are telling the market, hey, it's really risky to work with startups as a vendor. Like, why would you choose a startup for a critical system? Why would you start in the EdTech space? Why would you choose a startup to be the backbone of a class or a curriculum or a corporate training that you're doing? And it can be really, really scary when we're out there, right? And then secondly, back earlier this spring, we had this big drop in the stock market. All of a sudden, you saw companies like LinkedIn, boom, they lost tons and tons of market share before they got bought by Microsoft. And it's really difficult. It can be very tenuous when we're going out there and selling as a startup. Even more so, I don't know if any of you are familiar with an organization called CB Insights. They publish really great material, and one of the reports that they published recently was looking at the top 20 reasons why startups fail. The top 20 reasons why startups fail. So I want to ask you a quick question. What do you think is the number one reason why startups fail? What's the number one reason that CB Insights found why startups fail? Type that in the chat box. Type that in the question box. What do you think is the number one reason why startups fail? Some responses here already. It's quick. So reason number one, Harris says running out of cash. You're right. That's it's not number one. It is number two. Yanni is saying failure to pivot and failure to move quickly. Yes, that is very, very close. So Stanley is also saying running out of cash. So actually, the answers here too, you both nailed, all of you have nailed two of the top reasons. So reason number one is lack of demand for the product. You're like, wait a minute. If you're a startup, assumably you would have built a product for a problem that exists in the market, right? Well, it turns out that when CB Insights looked at the reasons why startups fail, they built a product, however, they weren't able to find the market for their product. And so what Yanni was saying about the failure to pivot, that's really critical. It's like, you can build a product that you think is really cool, really interesting, uses great technology, has all these features. If there's no market for it, then there's no reason for anyone to buy it, right? So that was reason number one, is lack of demand. Reason number two was lack of cash. So a couple of you have mentioned running out of cash. And that could definitely be whether they either used up all the investment capital, or it just means that if they're bootstrapping, they're out of money, or they just couldn't get enough revenue walking in the door. Reason number three, surprisingly, was team dynamics. So meaning that the team just didn't have a cohesion sense of moving in the right direction, a similar approach to the mission and vision of the company. So team dynamics is number three. Number four was pricing strategy. Now, that doesn't mean that people priced too high. It could mean that they priced too low. It just meant that they didn't price appropriately for their markets. That was reason number four. And reason number five was competition. Reason number five was competition. So one is lack of demand. Two is running out of cash. Three is team dynamics. Four is pricing strategy. Five is competition. And when I looked at that report, I was like, 4 out of 5 reasons, the 4 out of 5 top reasons was because of a sales problem. They're either trying to push a product, a square peg, into a round hole. They didn't figure out how to generate revenue quick enough. They weren't pricing high enough. They were getting hit from competitors, whether they're direct competitors or just trying to overcome the inertia of a process that might already be in place, especially, and you guys know this if you're in EdTech, how difficult it can be to work through curriculum changes and work through the long history that it could be around teaching a class or teaching a course, right? So 4 out of the 5 problems that related to startups failing were all related to sales. And so these are all the reasons why I feel like this is so critical to talk about this, because it's so easy for us to fall in this trap and say, you know, look, I haven't sold anything, but that's okay because I'm learning a lot in the market. Or I haven't sold anything, but that's okay because I got a bunch of people that are trying out my product under some kind of free trial. Or, you know, I haven't made any progress, but gosh, I've made a lot of connections. I've got a lot of good relationships, and I went to 3 conferences and I collected all these business cards. Yeah, okay, those things are important, but what's even more important is getting cash in the door and selling our product. And that's why I wanted to talk about this particular topic, give you specific strategies that we can follow right away in Q4 to help you get those customers right now. So I want to ask you 3 different questions. So you guys have been great about putting in the chat box and really engaging here. So before we get diving into some of the content here, I want to ask 3 different questions. So the first one is really easy, and I just want to use 1 or 2 words. I want to ask you, we're going into Labor Day, and it's this weekend coming up. I want to know, do you have any Labor Day plans? Do you have any Labor Day plans? It could be, hey, I'm camping, going to Central Park, going to museums, going down to the shore, whatever that is. Do you have any Labor Day plans? I'd love to hear them. Love to hear them. Work. Massimo, I hope I'm saying that right. Is it Massimo or Massimo? I think it's Massimo. He's working all weekend. Oh man, that's a bummer. But that's okay. Sometimes that day in the office when there's nothing else going on around you, especially on Monday, could be a huge productivity spike. Harris is saying he's going to the beach, hopefully with no hurricanes. I agree. Totally agree on that. My parents live down in Ocean City, New Jersey, and I could definitely appreciate the lack of hurricanes. We got school starting this week. Good. No, that's good. I was just kind of curious how people are spending their Labor Day weekends. I know some other people are doing some camping, taking some day trips, doing those kinds of things. So second question. So this one might be a little bit more difficult. If there's one emotion or one outcome from our time today on this webinar that best describes what you want to get out of our time, what would that be? So if there's one emotion, one outcome that would best describe what you want to get out of our time today over the next 45 minutes or so, what would that be? We talked about all the different reasons why this is such a critical time of year, talked about all the reasons why a lot of startups fail as it's related to sales. If there's one outcome, one emotion that you'd like to get out of our time today, what would that outcome be? And I'm going to take a sip of coffee while you guys are answering. A clear strategy to make a pilot program work. Absolutely, yeah. In fact, I've got a nice little worksheet that I'll share with you guys that you can use to implement that strategy. What's another one? I've only heard from a couple of you. Come on, guys. This is just like class. You guys are in EdTech. You guys are selling to teachers, professors in the corporate market. You know that classes will run much, much better when I'm hearing from you. So come on, let me hear from you. What's another outcome? What's another emotion as a result of our time together? What's one outcome? What's one emotion you'd like to get from our time together? Here's a tough one. Harris says this is a tough one. Insight on pricing strategy. We are going to touch a little bit on pricing strategy. And if I don't get all of your questions answered, Harris, then we can definitely pick that up separately. Actionable steps to take today, says Colette. I love that. Yes, we'll definitely give you some actionable steps. Figuring out who those first 10 customers should be. Says John, great, good. These are really good. Thank you so much for hopping in and volunteering some of your thoughts here, guys. And now the last question I want to ask you, the third question is, where do you and your teams get most frustrated with your sales process right now? So where do you and your teams get most frustrated with your sales and your sales process right now? So if you think about, kind of break up the sales process, there's kind of prospecting, finding our, future customers, getting them into some kind of sales pipeline, converting them into paying customers. Is there something, one of those 3 things that's most frustrating? Is there something else related to sales that you feel like this, man, if we could just get this one thing figured out, it would really relieve a lot of tension and frustration. So what do you and your team get most frustrated about with your sales process? I remember when I was selling in EdTech, the thing that was most frustrating to me was this idea of committees. And I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. When I was working at Pearson Education, selling, so mostly focused on selling textbooks, so going back 15, 20 years. One of the things most frustrating for me was learning that there are these committees and these dynamics within committees and how decisions were made. So what's most frustrating for you? Lack of qualified prospects due to lack of brand recognition. That's a good one. Difficulty closing the sale. The slow pace. Yeah, the timelines, man. They can be super frustrating. Yeah, these are all really good. These are all really good. Awesome. Good. So one of the things I want to do is, I mentioned just really quickly, briefly, somebody mentioned about pilot programs. I want to make sure that you stick around all the way through the end, because there are a couple of different really specific worksheets and tools that I've built that I use with my clients and I let them have access to. And I'm going to make those worksheets available to you. And I'm also going to show you how you can get access to the recording at the end. So if I don't specifically mention how to get these worksheets as I talk about them through the webinar, just make sure you remind me at the end. You can just put a little note here in the chat box, but definitely stick around so you can get access to all the stuff that we're going to be talking about. Okay. Cool. So one of the things I just wanted to kind of quickly talk about, just to give you some more perspective on my view on EdTech, kind of my origin story, if you will. I spent, as I mentioned, a bit of time at Pearson Education. So actually, it was before Prentice. I was hired as Prentice Hall College textbook sales rep. This is going back in the late 90s, so going back almost 20 years. And at the time, we were actually part of Simon & Schuster and part of Viacom. And eventually, it was sold into Pearson Education. And so from being a sales rep, I then moved into an editorial position. And for some of you might be familiar with that role, specifically within the college university market. It's basically like being a product manager. And from there, after spending about almost 6 years at Pearson, I then moved into the startup world of EdTech, and I worked with a company called Aplia. And Aplia was started by an economist out of Stanford University, focusing on how to get students more engaged with economics courses. Initially, that was our target, just focusing on economics courses, principles of macro, principles of micro, getting students not just sitting in a classroom taking notes and drawing graphs. How do you get them to interact? How do you get them to use economics experiments where they're standing up and trading with each other so they can understand supply and demand? How do you get them doing actual exercises in economics as opposed to just, like I said, kind of the chalk talk? And so, a lot of the work that I've done, going from Pearson to Aplia, the reason I was asked to come move to work over at Aplia is because I had kind of this big college textbook experience. We wanted to take some of those principles and those learnings and apply it to a startup setting. So we have some structure around that. And then secondly, by going through those first couple of years at Aplia, getting from zero revenue to our first couple of million in revenue, a lot of the strategies that, not just the three that we're going to talk about today, but other strategies that I've deployed, these are all things that I've done myself. And these are ones that I've put to work and I know can work in the right situation if applied correctly. So I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just giving you some background there. And the result, especially on the Aplia side of things, we were able to sell. The company was acquired by Cengage Learning. It was first, I think, Thomson Reuters, and then eventually it became Cengage. So that was a case where Aplia was acquired for a multiple of revenue, which was really great for the founders, of course, and good for me to say that I was part of that startup. And since then, I've worked in two other startups, neither of which have been in the EdTech space, both of which, though, have been situations where I walked in to that company with virtually zero revenue through those companies to the first couple of millions in revenue. So I feel really comfortable and confident in terms of sharing some of these ideas, and I hope that they'll be useful for you. And that's kind of why I wanted to share that story, just to help you understand a little bit more about me if you didn't get a chance to do some homework before we got here. So cool. So we're going to dive into the content here and go through those top three things. I want to ask you one more question, and that's what's been useful so far in the time today? What's been most useful so far in our time today? So we've been on the line here for about 15 minutes or so. What's been most useful so far for you? Yeah, so one of them is that, yeah, it can be done, right? I mean, having, as I mentioned, some of the practical experience that I've had in startups, being able to translate that and knowing that you're going to have some strategies that you can use today. Second one is knowing that you've got some workshops and worksheets and frameworks that I'm going to be sharing with you. So you'll be able to walk out of here with some tools, really specific tools that you can use. Yeah, these are really great. Awesome. Good, good, good. Okay, so let's dive in. Asima was mentioning hearing reasons why startups fail. Yeah, you know, it's really it's so frustrating, and it's really the reason, to get even a little bit more into it, the reason I started my company, Salesfolia, was because I'd spent time at 3 different startups, and we had success, and I'd look around and these other companies would not have success, would not have success. And when you look at their product market and see, like, wow, that's a really great product, and it seems like the market really needs that thing. And it turns out that most of the time those teams failed. It wasn't that the product was bad or that there wasn't demand in some cases. It was just that they never learned how to sell their product. And that's why that CB Insights, I think, really is very revealing, and why I like that study, because it shows that 4 of the top 5 reasons why startups fail is because of a sales-related problem. And it's my mission with this company is to help as many startups as possible to avoid that, to be successful, and certainly never fail because of a sales-related problem. Great, thanks so much. So here we go. I'm going to take one little sip of water. And we're going to dive into the first of the 3 specific strategies that I want to focus on today. So the first strategy that I want to talk about is focusing on strategic priorities. So if you want to write that down, focusing on strategic priorities of your target customer. So in other words, think about this as selling the problem, not the product. Sell the problem, not the product. So let me give you an example, and then we'll go into a couple of key principles around this. So I mentioned my time at Pearson, and when I was selling textbooks, I was in the western half of North Carolina. So I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time. So basically my territory was like roughly from the Greensboro, Winston-Salem area out to Asheville, and then I went up to, basically covered up to Virginia and down to, and including parts of South Carolina. And one of my accounts was this technical college, a community college in North Carolina called GUILFORD Technical Community College. And one of the things that was a huge, huge, huge problem, and still is a big problem with many of the community colleges, like the students that they serve, was in the area of remedial math. So what the problem was with these guys was they would have 2,000 and 3,000 students every year would have to take classes on basic math, basic pre-algebra, and algebra courses. Like these are classes, this is like math that these students should have learned in 8th grade, 7th grade. And they're getting to a community college and they're just incapable of doing basic math. And if you can't do basic math, then it's nearly impossible to do any other type of curriculum. And so as a service course, the math department was responsible for teaching 2,000 to 3,000 students every single semester how to get through this. You can just imagine the burden. I was taking a bunch of notes here. And one of the major challenges was that as this kept growing every single year, at the same time that these enrollments were growing, there was a ton of pressure on the community college because they had just created a bunch of computer labs. They were way overburdened with the amount of budget money that was available to them in order to pay for students. They were moving from a quarter system to a semester system. And one of the big areas that they were focusing on were things what they called full-time enrollments, FTEs. And so we had all of these different things happening at one time. And so at the same time, we at Pearson, at Prentice Hall, we had rolled out this brand new book by a woman named Elaine Martin Gay. And so here I am as this brand new sales rep, and I'm going in there and trying to displace an incumbent. I think it was from Addison Wesley was the book that we were trying to displace at the time. And every teacher, you go to talk to them about this class, and they're like, yeah, this is a pain. And now we have these computer labs, and now we're getting hammered about FTEs. We don't have any budget money. There's all these problems. The last thing I want to do is change a textbook. the last thing I want to do is make any changes to my course syllabus, because I've already got to make some other changes going from a course system to a semester system, right? So like all of these headwinds coming at us. And so, we sat down. I mean, these are huge enrollments, right? 2,000, 3,000 students in these classes. So you can imagine if I'm selling a textbook that's 50, 60 bucks at the time, I mean, that's a pretty big sale. We're talking, big dollars here. And so what we started to do, we said, well, look, going back to this idea of what are the strategic priorities? Well, instead of looking at these impacts in a negative way, we kind of turned it around and say, well, what are the positives here? What's the opportunity? And so what we started doing is scheduling some meetings with the dean of the department, as well as other administrators that were responsible at the strategic level around what was going on with those departments. And so what we discovered was that those investments in the computer labs were actually designed to help the professors and help the teachers handle some of that load. But the problem was that now they had invested all in these computer labs, but they didn't have the content that they could use, because this is, like I said, this is the late 90s. This is when a lot of the online companion websites were just starting. We're putting CD-ROMs in books. The idea of doing videos was still pretty new. The old videos used to be like VHS tapes instead of videos that could be viewed online, or instead of videos that could be installed into a computer lab. And so by talking at the strategic level, one of the things we discovered was that these deans and these other administrators, they were actually on the hook themselves, because they had put this budget money and asked even higher up to the entire community college and, of course, to the state for the funding for these computer labs. So now these computer labs in place, and they have all these professors, all these teachers, these instructors complaining about the amount of time, the lack of time that they had to serve these students. And so what we're able to do is say, well, look, at the strategic level, you've got all of this investment, both professionally as well as monetarily, into making sure that these new programs, the computer labs, and getting the FTEs, and that, because the FTEs drove funding at the state level, you have these kind of strategic level problems that we can solve with our textbook in ways that the competitors can't. And what that did, it completely turned around the way that the conversation went. And so I just use that as an example that it enabled us to, by looking at the strategic priorities, instead of looking at just what the product did and just trying to sell at the lowest level, hoping to get some buy-in and hoping that they would want to make a change, even though they all clearly said they didn't want to make a change, we're actually able to create some collaboration between the dean and the administrative level and the teacher level. So by focusing on the strategic priorities, it was really tough for those teachers, right? Because I mean, this is the classroom that this type of situation, like you're going into remedial math. You can imagine if you're an instructor teaching remedial math, these are students that are already unmotivated, right? If they were at all motivated, they probably would have learned pre-algebra back in 7th, 8th grade. And a lot of them are just entering community college because they're trying to get a 2-year degree in electronics or some other trade so they can go get a job, right? So super frustrating for those instructors. They're dealing with a listless student base, right? And secondly, they're always feeling like they're at odds with the administration. The administration's pushing all this stuff at them. They're changing from quarters to semesters. They're pushing in all these computer lab things. So it was just a really antagonistic kind of environment for us. And I think, as from a sales perspective, what we want to do is create more of a kumbaya. We want it to be the driver. We want it to be kind of the spoke in the wheel here to generate some collaboration and support and really give them a clear target to work together. And so by focusing on strategic priorities, what we're able to do is get the administrators and the teachers. Like, oddly, of all people, you would think that why would they want to talk to a textbook vendor? Why would a textbook company be in the middle of that conversation? But we were the ones that were able to get them talking and helping the administrators have a really clear story on how, hey, if we use this product, if you guys think about using this product that's got videos, it's got companion websites, it's going to allow you to assign homework and do automated assessments, so you're going to spend less time grading, right? It also speaks to how you can create collaboration, and I'm just speaking directly with my experience with that one situation, but more broadly, if you're selling into other markets, are there other organizations or other groups of people, like a parent-teacher association, can you bring them in to provide some influence and some authority about what is best for the students? So think about it in the standpoint of, your job. I like to think of myself sometimes as Spider-Man. Right? I'm sitting there and I'm spinning the web. And my job is to spin this communication web that's designed to create collaboration across all of the different stakeholders that are involved. And if we're only focused just on that teacher level or that professor level, or if it's a corporate environment and you're only focused on the trainers, the corporate trainers within the organization, what we're missing here is the impetus from the top down. And a lot of times, if we focus on the strategic priorities at the top and understand what those executives or administrators or top-level managers are really focused on, then we can be the ones that bring the two closer together with the right product. And so specifically what I wanted to show as an example, just real quick, over to, here it is. So like, when you're going out and you're doing your selling, right, if you're focused on whether it's a high school or elementary school or charter schools of some kind, or you're focused on the university market, look for different publications like this one. So when I sell in the outside of EdTech, if you're selling to a publicly traded company, publicly traded companies have their annual reports. In those annual reports are all of the strategic priorities that the company is pursuing over the next year or two, right? And so you can find these same kinds of documents, whether it's for the community college here in North Carolina, that's going to look at all of the key drivers that are going to establish the value of what that community college segment means to the entire state of North Carolina. And so if you can take the time to look at some of these reports, some of the general larger strategies, and then make connections with those senior level, whether it's a dean or an administrator or an executive, and start talking in their languages first, and then start making the ties, what that gives you the ability to do is some what's called high-low selling. So sell to the high level, and then also sell to the low level. And that's where you can start creating that collaboration. That's where you can start to become kind of Spider-Man in the middle in order to get, building those coalitions and getting those people to talk to each other and understand how by tackling these strategic priorities, we're also going to make life easier for the people that are actually implementing that product that you've got on the EdTech side. So give you like a quick example of a company that I know has deployed this. So one of the startups that I work with is a company called NewTech. And they're based in Sweden, and they sell software for multi-touch screens. So I don't know if you've ever seen kind of these big pieces of hardware where you can touch the screen and all kinds of different things happen. And so it's a way for students to be more kinesthetic in their learning, but taking advantage of a digital environment. And so working with Harry, who's the CEO over there, they had a challenge with one of their customers, and one of their customers was the distributor of their software. And the problem that they had was that this distributor had already had about 2,000 licenses left over from the previous year. And now they're trying to renew the contract to get another couple thousand purchased for the following year. And the distributor's sitting there going like, hey man, I already got a bunch left over. I don't need to renew the contract. That's a big problem, right? You need that new revenue. And so what Harry and I did, we kind of like dissected what's going on with that distributor such that they didn't sell the other 2,000 that they had bought the year before. And what we realized, and what Harry and I came to the conclusion of, was that distributor, whenever they were getting a sales lead if somebody was interested in NewTech, interested in their product, they're actually blowing that lead in a lot of cases. So what would happen is somebody would go to that distributor, ask questions about the product, and the distributor themselves actually didn't really know much about the NewTech product. They would send a brochure, they send a one-pager, they do all kind of they kind of sell, but not really. And so what we did was we crafted a plan. We said, well, look, here's what you want to do as a distributor, right? You want to grow your revenue. You want to take market share. What we're going to do is actually collaborate with you. And when sales leads come in, I want you to notify us, and we're going to help you with those sales leads. So by creating some collaboration between our company and not just focusing on like, hey, I want to push these new licenses on you, I'll give you a great discount. Instead, it was like, what are you trying to do here? You're trying to grow revenue. You're trying to clear out the inventory you have. You're in a highly competitive market. Let us help you sell our own product, right? So that's a case where just focusing on that strategic priority of that distributor and saying like, hey, yeah, I want to sell your product. I got a bunch left over. I can't sell more. Instead of taking it from kind of this, kind of conversation and turning it around and going, well, what are you really trying to do here? Well, we're really trying to grow market share. We're in a heavily competitive environment, and we're not closing nearly as many, we're not converting as many interested parties as we should be. Okay, well, now that I understand those three things, let's put together a plan and work together. And focus on that level as opposed to me just trying to get you to buy more stuff at a lower price. So that's just kind of number one, is focusing on strategic priorities. And so I've given you a couple of really specific examples, both from myself and from EdTech as an example. And so we just talked about the importance of focusing on strategic priorities. And ultimately what this does is it reduces your risk, it improves, lifts you up in the eyes of your target market, because now you're partnering with them, you're collaborating, you're talking about things at a strategic level, not just trying to sell this feature or sell this product. You're focusing on the problem that the strategic priorities are trying to solve, not worried about so much about the product itself. And so I want to ask you, I want to kind of turn this around and ask you and say, look, if you had a really clear, if you could choose between doing it, which might be like focusing on features, trying to find one person that might use your product, and then hoping that person can bring it up to the executive level, or you can start to change it around and say, look, before we even go trying to sell to the lower level people, let's figure out what these executives, administrators, deans, principals, whoever that is up top, let's figure out what they're trying to do first. Which do you choose, right? Which is better? Is it the old way, or is it the new way, right? So if you had, let me ask you, if you had a clear playbook on how to approach your accounts, if you had a really clear way to identify really specific pains that a customer has, problems that they have, strategic priorities that they have, would that be helpful for your business? Tell me. Put it in the chat box. Would that be helpful for your business? I'm about to show you a little tool that I want to make available to you. So in the chat box, if you think this would be helpful, if you think you can implement this strategy of focusing on strategic priorities, put it in the chat box. Just tell me yes or thumbs up or plus, something like that. What do you think? Would this be helpful for you? Is this a good strategy, something you feel like you can use? Yeah, I get a couple of yeses. Cool. So one of the worksheets that I want to make available to you guys here, it's really simple. It's called the Problem and Pain Worksheet. And basically what this does is it focuses on a couple of key problems that oftentimes show up whenever we're selling to large enterprises. So sometimes that problem is around automation and digitization of content in your case. Sometimes it's around regulatory compliance, any kind of rules or regulations, especially in the educational space, new standards, new educational standards. So this is a really quick worksheet that you can use in order to help you identify what are the strategic priorities, give you some really specific talking points with your target customers, and get them thinking of you more as a partner as opposed to somebody who's just trying to dump some kind of startup product on them. So that's one of the worksheets I want to make available to you, so you can start to use that in your conversation so that you're not just selling to this level, going up here and talking about strategy, you're talking about key areas, key problems, key challenges that the district or the school or the university or the state is having, okay? So, so that was idea number one. That's idea number one, and I know I'm kind of going pretty long on that one because I think it's really important, because the next two are even more tactical. And that's why I wanted to focus on this one first, just to make sure that it's kind of a mindset change. You got to get yourself, you're the startup CEO. You're an executive. So talk to those executives as an executive. Talk about strategic priorities. And so I just want to kind of relate that back and say, look, if you start doing this, it's going to accelerate your conversations. You're going to accelerate your timelines because you're going to start to find specific problems to solve as opposed to trying to find people who might be interested in the product. Okay? Make sense? Capiche, as they say? Cool. All right. So, getting lots of yeses here. All right, awesome, awesome, awesome. Let's do number two. Strategy number two. So strategy number two, I'm also going to kind of use my experience from Applia. So strategy number two that I want to talk to you about is starting small, then growing the accounts. Start small, then grow. So if you're taking notes, just write start small, then grow. And let me give you a quick example, and then we'll get into a couple of key ideas here. So again, I'll relate back to my experience at Applia. And one of the challenges we had, we were selling to the university market. And specifically, if you remember, I mentioned we were selling 2 economics classes. So this is like principles of economics classes at big state universities. You're talking about 1,000 students in some of these sections, or a couple hundred in each section, and more than 1,000 students enrolled over the course of each semester or each quarter, right? And so one of the challenges, of course, is that even if our founder was a really well-known economist, and even if people thought our tech was really cool, nobody's going to trust some new software product to run their entire principles of economics classes if they've been teaching in a certain way for 20 years, right? It's just way too risky for them as a professor, as an instructor, as a graduate student, right? Graduate students are told, like, this is how we teach the course. You just teach it this way. Here's the syllabus. Go do the lectures. And so one of the challenges that we had was, okay, we get a lot of people interested in the idea of the product, but we couldn't get anybody to pull the trigger. And so one of the things we learned was to start really, really small. And the way we started small with some of these, like this is an example, this is like a window of the product. These are, it's an online trading. This is one of the experiments, the economics experiments through Applia that we ran. Well, one of the challenges was, you know, getting these professors to take a chance on it. Like, how can we get them to use Applia in the classroom, in a real classroom environment, but do so without making them feel like this is a big risky endeavor. So they had all these different computer labs in the university, but a lot of them were getting really underutilized, especially in there's 2 situations that we uncovered. And this is where I would throw it back to you. Think about, as I'm describing this situation, think about how you could use this idea for your EdTech startup. So in their case, there was 2 places where we could leverage the computer lab availability. One was summer school. So what we realized is that in summer school, obviously enrollments are different, and a lot of professors, instead of taking advantage of the computer labs, they're trying to cram, you know, a 13-week semester into 4 weeks. Right, so it's just lecture, just dump, let's get all the stuff to the students, right? And so instead, what we found was a couple early adopters that said, oh, you know what, it's summer school. I want to try something new. This is my chance to try something new. I want to make this fun for students. A lot of times these are students that are trying to get ahead, or these are students that maybe fell behind and they're trying to catch up. So let me use this as an opportunity to teach in a new way. So summer school was one. The second were honors classes. So even at big, huge universities where they might have 300 people in a section, in a standard class, there were these honor sections that would have 30, 40 students in it. And so what we could do is sell to just the professor teaching the honors course, saying, why don't you give it a try? Why don't you try it in your class? And then get some success, right? And from there, we would have some proof points that, hey, this technology, which is brand new at the time, could actually work. And so it's the idea of starting really small with the summer school classes and starting with the honors classes. That enabled us to get the foot in the door in a lot of places where we had huge enrollments down the road. So when you're selling to, you know, if it's an environment like the college universities or it's in the elementary schools, right, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? There's just a lot of professors, a lot of teachers. You know, I mentioned committees was an area that I learned as a textbook salesperson that was really, really frustrating. And so what ended up happening is you have all these people that wanted input into the materials that were being used. And if instead of trying to sell the big deal, trying to sell a 1,000-seat license out of the gate, we could focus on something really small, get some proof points, and then grow from there, what we had is a lot more success. So it's really frustrating when you're in these situations and there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? And the other thing that's really frustrating is you might do a product demo and somebody goes, hey, that's really cool. I really love the product. Looks pretty interesting, so let's talk about it again. Come back in 2 weeks and maybe I'll bring somebody else. And then you go have another conversation, but they don't take action. And then they go, well, this, you know, we can't really make the change right now, but maybe we'll do it next time. And then there's another conversation. Like there's never an end to these interesting conversations. We feel like we're making progress, but actually we're not, right? So fundamentally what we want to do here is find a way to show proof that the product does what we say it's going to do, that it's going to solve the problem that we're out to solve. And really what we're looking for is street cred, right? We're looking for some street cred because we can just talk about our product and how great it is, and we can hypothesize and share demos and have simulated classes and all those things. But until we get people actually using it, then we're not going to have the proof or the street cred that we need in order to get larger sale that we really want to get, right? So that's principle number 2. Start small and then grow. Specifically, a couple really specific things that you want to do here is focus in one problem at a time. So this relates back to the strategic priorities. And, you know, a university, a school district, a state, you know, they might have 3, 4, 5 different strategic priorities. Just focusing on one strategic priority. And when you're implementing and you're finding these small places to implement, whether in our case at Affiliate it was an honors class or a summer school class, focus in on just solving that one problem for that one class. You can almost think of it as if you were a technology-based consultant, right? So we're going to zero in and be super successful with this really small implementation. We're going to focus in to make sure that we're successful. And from there, we'll be able to build out our team of customer champions from the inside out, right? The other thing that's really, really critical here, is you want to think and, not or. Think and, not or. And here's what I mean by this. When we're selling our product, especially as a startup, right? You're out there, whether it's software, some kind of online course, you know, whatever that EdTech, whatever that solution is that you're trying to sell. Oftentimes we're going and we're looking at the existing marketplace and saying, well, you know, they're already doing these things, so we want to get them to stop doing those things and start using our stuff. Stop using that old system, stop using that old software, and use ours instead. The challenge is, again, because we're perceived as really risky, people aren't going to take a chance to just swap us out, right? Because what happens if your product doesn't work as well as you say it's going to work? Or what happens if it breaks down, right? What if it goes offline? How do we know that you guys are as stable as this old incumbent? So what I want you to do is think and, not or. So instead of saying, well, you have to use that or us, think and. Say, look, yeah, keep using that old system and use our software for certain elements or certain parts of the problem that this old system can't use. So what that does is it reduces the risk so that if something does go wrong with your product, it's okay because they can always fall back to what they're already doing. And it also relieves the tension that, oh, I've got to make this major change. It's like if you're crossing this huge chasm, you know, from one cliff to the other, and it's like, okay, we're going to make this jump. We're going to take out that old system and start using this new one. It's way too risky for a lot of these people, right? And that also is what leads to really long sales times. I know a couple of you talked about shortening the sales time. So by approaching your customers, saying, hey, we want to start small, and we're not suggesting that you stop using your old system. Instead, we want you to use our system alongside of it, and we're going to be here to help you all along the way as almost like technology-based consultants. We'll be there on site. We'll help you build a syllabus, whatever it is that we need to do in order to get you using our stuff. Then what that does is the person goes, oh, okay, yeah, I'll give that a try. Because then they're not giving up all this old stuff. It allows you to slowly slide into getting them to use your product. And then over time, they might start thinking about dropping off what they've been doing because now they have proof. Now you have street cred with that user, okay? So a really, really good example of this, another company I've worked with is a company called Elastic. Matthew's the CEO there. And their company focuses on English skills courses, and in particular, he focuses on the university segment. And you can imagine with the influx of foreign students over the last couple of decades, one of the challenges, despite having the TOEFL test, is that a lot of students are coming into business classes, and they might speak good conversational English, but they don't speak really well from a business standpoint or from a technical standpoint. If they're an engineering curriculum or in a science curriculum, they might do well on the test to get into the university, but they don't have the really practical applications that it takes to succeed in those classes. And then worse, once they get out of, if they do manage to make it through and get a 4-year engineering degree, and they're going out in the business world, they don't always have the business skills to communicate in a business setting, right? So that's what this company does is solve that problem. And so what Matthew did, he's trying to break into a couple of the big University of California campuses, huge enrollments. These could be thousands, tens of thousands of students that could use this platform. And so one of the things he did is he started really small. And he started in one of the University of California campuses. He started off with just the business school, the MBA students that were coming in, specifically, not just the business school, but the MBA students, a couple hundred MBA students. And of the couple hundred MBA students, about 50% were coming in from abroad. And so he really narrowed down and started really small and said, look, let's just focus in on those MBA students that are, foreign students having trouble with English and making sure that they are using this and getting results. So he's able to work with just a couple of people in the business school in the MBA program to roll this out. And what that did is give him access and proof and street cred that this thing is working. So it's just a really specific example of how you might be able to take the same concept with your startup, whether it's in the elementary school, high school, university, corporate market, whatever that is. Think about ways that you can really narrow it down, start really small, and grow from there. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So I have a question for you. I've shared 2 different ideas for you, and specifically the second idea about starting small and growing from there. I know it's a lot of information. I'm coming at you with a lot of stuff. That second piece, do you think you've got the ability to take that idea and deploy it for your startup? I would love to hear from you. Put it in the chat box, the question box. Is there something about that idea? And if so, what would that idea be? What would that idea be? How could you use this idea of starting small and growing? Is this something you feel like you could deploy with your startup? Getting a couple of yes. Yep, yes, awesome, cool. So, okay, so that's idea number 2. So a couple minutes left. I'm going to do idea number 3, and then we'll wrap it up. So if you guys can hang in there with me, you can see I'm motoring along. So keep taking notes, and then at the end, if you have questions along the way, just jot them down, because at the end, I want to answer any questions that you guys have about the stuff that we're covering. Okay. Okay. Number 3. Idea number 3. So earlier, somebody mentioned about pilot programs, and I'm going to default back to my experience at Applia again when it came to pilot programs, because again, if you think about the kind of the cascade we're talking about here, is focusing on strategic priorities, doing some high-low selling, getting executive or administrator buy-in, so that the people that are actually teaching the class have the support in order to get started rolling out with whatever product it is. Then we talked about starting small and growing from there. So I want to get even more specific and talk about how you can use pilot programs as a way to leverage and get customers this fall, right? So at Applia, one of the things we did, again, we're talking about these experiments that we're doing in the classroom. And so one of the focus areas that we did with Applia was this idea of almost like a white glove concierge service. So what we did is, once we identified one of these economics professors that were interested in running these experiments and using Applia as a software program, instead of just saying, hey, go ahead and give it a try, let us know how it goes, we would work side by side with them. So each of the people that worked at Applia, there was about 5 or 6 of us that were focused on sales and marketing and product, and we were all kind of assigned a certain number of schools, and our job every week leading up to the class was to work with the professor and help them design their syllabus and show them specifically which experiments and which assignments they could provide to their students and when to actually use those in the classroom. So it wasn't just, yeah, you can use it and then good luck, let us know how it goes. We were heavily involved with how they're going to integrate that into their syllabus. And then even more so, we had a customer success person. Her name was Lissa. And for any of the pilots that we were running, any of these implementations we were running over the summer, one of the things that she would do is actually get in the car. We were based in the Bay Area, so we had, we kind of focused locally at first, because there were a lot of universities, and it was easy for us to get access to those people. She would actually drive to that campus the day that the professor was running the experiment and be there on site. Because you can imagine, if you're an economics professor, it's like you're kind of freaking out. You're like, okay, I'm going to try this new approach, and even though I'm on board with the idea of it, I'm kind of worried that this thing isn't going to work. So by sending out Lissa to sit in that classroom during the hour that they were running these experiments, it gave them a lot of confidence, but it also gave us the ability to make sure that the professor was seeing the proof. They were getting the results that they needed to get. And so by focusing in as part of this pilot program, we'd say, look, we're not going to just like give you the software to go and use. It's not a free trial, right? We're going to need you or your students to pay for this, and you're not only going to get access to the product, you're going to get access to all of this support on top of that. We're going to help you with your syllabus. We're going to help you design the assignments. We're going to have Lissa come out and be there on site to make sure that the experiments go well. So this idea of a concierge service and working with the syllabus was really in our ability to get some of these pilots not just implemented, but getting them paid pilots, right? You know, I know a lot of times people look at like, well, we're going to do free trials here, right? We're going to do free trials. Well, I want you to think about the cost of free, right? There's a cost to you because now you're supporting this customer who may or may not actually really use the product, because for them, there's a cost of free that even though that nobody's paying for it, they have to implement, they have to spend time, they have to spend resources, they have to shift things around. So there's this big cost of free. So what ends up happening, especially on the customer side, even though it's free, they end up using it less than if they had made it paid. Because if it's paid, right, and it's collaborative and you're involved and they know that there's some accountability on their end, then they're actually going to make sure to implement it. And your job is to collaborate with them to make sure that they do implement it properly. So by setting up these pilot programs in a way that we say, hey, in the summer school class, you're going to use the product. Here, we're going to help. You're going to get use of the product. We're going to help you with the syllabus. You're going to get support. We're going to help you with reporting. You're going to get all of these things, and here's why you need to pay for this pilot as opposed to just doing a free trial and hoping that you use it. It's a big, big difference there, right? The other thing this does is solve what's called the penny gap. So making your pilots paid, the penny gap then gets you across to the other side where that customer is paying you something, right? Getting you in the system, getting you through procurement, getting you into accounting. So even if the amount that you're charging is much smaller than you're expecting to charge over the long run for a full implementation, focusing on a small pilot of maybe it's, you know, if it's a 10-week class, maybe the pilot is for the first 3 weeks, you're going to use our product in addition to all the stuff you're already using, like we talked about, think and, not or, and we're going to charge you a small amount, and not only are you going to get access to the product, but you're going to get the white glove concierge service where I'm going to help you prepare your lectures or your lessons. I'm going to be there, whether it's virtually, online, you know, watching you as you're using, or physically be there. And so what that does is it increases the amount of value that the person is getting as a result of that pilot, and it also makes it more apt, makes it easier for them to justify that cost. And even more so, if we go all the way back to the idea of strategic priorities, if you're doing the high-low selling, and you've got now an executive, an administrator, a dean, a principal, whoever, on board with how your product is going to solve the strategic problem that exists in the classroom or in the curriculum or with the state guidelines or whatever that is, now you've got somebody up here that would maybe have some discretionary budget. You know, maybe they even if you want to sell your product for, you know, $10,000 per month as access, you go, hey, we're going to run a pilot. The pilot's going to be $1,000. Well, somebody up here might have $1,000 in a discretionary fund, in a technology fund, in some other kind of consulting arrangement that they, you know, maybe they hire consultants all the time and they take money out of that consulting budget and they give it to you as part of your pilot, right? So that's why these all cascade. Start with the strategic priorities, get the executives, the administrators, the principals, the deans on board because they will have access to them, to the budget. Secondly, when you're focusing, starting small, it reduces the risk for the people teaching the class. And then thirdly, what that does is it sets you up so that you can offer this pilot program and say, you're going to get the product and all these other things, and we're going to charge you this price because you're going to get all of this extra stuff in addition to the product. So it's a very, very different mindset. You know, you're going to have to get your hands dirty in that sense. You're going to have to dive in and do a lot of the grunt work. I talked about it being almost like technology-based consulting. You're using your product as leverage to get you in the door, but you're really doing a lot of the work outside of your product, right? And then ultimately, it gives you ability to measure the success because you're there. You're watching them use the product, right? And so when it comes time to justify why they would want to roll it out larger on a larger scale, you've got proof. You've got the street cred that you need in order to get the rest of the ecosystem or the rest of the district or the rest of the university or whatever you're selling to actually use the product, okay? Does that make sense? I ran through that pretty quickly because I know we're coming up. We're just a little past the top of the hour, and I want to leave time for, give you guys some time for questions. Does that make sense? So pilot programs. For those of you who have questions around pilots, or those of you thinking that as a way to implement a strategy, is that a strategy? If we cascade these strategic priorities, number one. Number two is starting small, growing big. And number three, specifically starting small with these pilot programs. Are these strategies that you feel like you can use? Let me know. If this is this stuff that's not working. I know most of the people that started the webinar are still here, so I'm assuming that means that this is useful stuff. Is this good stuff? Put it in the chat box, yes or no. It's the stuff that you can use to get from your old way to your new way. Put it in the chat box. Let me know while I take a sip of coffee. Cool. Awesome. Getting lots of yeses. Great. It's just a matter of it's a mindset shift. I know for a lot of you, you might be offering free trials. You've got to cross that line in the sand. You've got to say no more free trials. We're offering pilot programs. Here's how the pilot programs work. Structure that. And the way that I want to help you do that, I mentioned there's a worksheet, another worksheet I want to show you, I want to make available to you real quick here. So I've got a second worksheet. It's called the Start of Selling Pilot Program Builder. So this worksheet is something that you can use as you're having conversations with your target market. You say, look, we don't do free trials here, and here's why we don't do free trials, right? We know there's a cost to you. You're going to have to invest time anyway, and we're going to be focusing on solving a strategic priority. And so what we want to do is outline this pilot program in a way that both sides know exactly what's going in and what should be coming out of that pilot. So using this worksheet, you're just filling out this worksheet and saying, look, here's the description, here's where it starts and ends, here's what we're measuring, the outcomes we're looking to achieve as part of this pilot program, and what's the timeline? Like if we're launching this pilot program from October 15th to October 31st, what are all the things that need to happen before and all the things that need to happen after? If you go down to the second sheet here, it gets even more specific, saying, okay, so during the setup and initiation process, these are the people on our side. Here are the people on your side that we're going to need involved, whether it's an IT person, a professor, an administrator, an assistant, whatever that is. Here are the people on our side, and these are the key tasks. Once we have the pilot set up, then we're going to go through configuration and training. Who are the people on your side? Who are the people on our side? What are the key tasks? Then we're going to launch and roll this thing out. Who are the people involved on your side? Who are the people involved on our side? What are the key tasks? And then even further, you can get another way to kind of do this. We're just organizing this pilot in a way that everybody's really clear as to what's going in, what's coming out, and then makes it really simple for you to charge a price, right? Because now they're really clear about what they're getting for that investment. And if we focus on the strategic priorities, if we focus on the problems, then we're zeroing in and focusing and making sure that the administrator, the executive, whoever it is, has the budget. They can send you a small amount of money, and that's what's going to get you the momentum you need to start getting some of these customers on board before the end of the year. Okay? Is that useful? Is this worksheet something you guys want to get a copy of? Helpful? Cool. Okay, so now what? Those are the three things we talked about: strategic priorities, starting small, growing from there, and then specifically using pilot programs. One of the things that I found, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, is that a lot of people come to these and they go, "Wow, this is really great content. I'd like to get more help. I'd like to get more help if I can." And so one of the things that I created is what's called the sales audit. And so especially because all of this was brought together through Ted King at Saddle Rock, and I know most of you are part of the EdTech group there in New York City. One of the things that I want to do for you is offer a 20-minute sales audit. So in that sales audit, what we're going to be covering is identifying exactly what's going on with your sales process right now. Where do you need to be in the next 3 to 6 months? And what's missing? What are the gaps? Right? So that you can come up and identify what are the key challenges or issues that you need to be solving for over the next 3 to 6 months so that you can start rolling out and implementing some of these strategies. So what I encourage you to do right now, you can go to calendly.com/salesqualia/20. It's a 20-minute conversation. We'll knock out, again, we're going to identify what the key challenges are. We're going to identify where you need to be in the next 3 to 6 months, and then figure out how do we close that gap between where you need to be and where you are now with your key challenges. So if you go ahead and go to calendly.com/salesqualia/20, you can book a time. You just pick a day that works for you, and then you'll see there are certain times that are open. I spend a ton of my time working with clients and doing a lot of education and workshop and traveling and those kinds of things. So there's only a couple time blocks that are available. So if you see a time block that works for you, I absolutely recommend snagging that time, because it may not be available as the week comes to a close. My weeks get really full. I keep a really full schedule. And so I've kept these spots open specifically because I was going to be running this webinar today. And as a thanks to Ted and a thanks to you for spending this time, if you want more help, this is absolutely the way to get it. Okay, so so that's the way to get more help. And I mentioned that I would do that, give you an opportunity to get some more help at the beginning of our session today. So the last thing I want to do is I want to keep you can see now at the bottom of the screen is that URL. I want to take some time here to answer your questions. I want to answer your questions about what we've covered today. We've covered a ton of ground. We've talked about giving you a couple different case studies, both for myself, working at Pearson and Prentice Hall, working at Applia as an EdTech VP of Sales. Giving you a couple examples from a couple clients I've worked with that have deployed some of these strategies in terms of strategic priorities, pilot programs, starting small, growing big. Lots and lots of stuff, lots of information that I've given to you. So, like I said, I try to give you everything I have in the time that we have together, everything I've got in the time that we have together. And so if there's anything that we've covered that isn't clear, or any questions that you have, then I just want you to write that stuff in the chat box right now. Let's tackle these. Let's make sure that you walk out of here really clear on how you can put these 3 strategies to work right now this fall to get your first or next 10 customers. Because I know, like we said, Labor Day is coming up. You've got a really short window before the end of the year. And if you want to make an impact this year, this fall, for your business, for your startup, get revenue in the door, get proof that your product works, get some street cred out there, then now's the time to ask those questions. So go ahead and pop those in the question box, and I'll keep an eye out for a couple of those. So, Seema's asking, how do we get access to the templates for the pilot process? Good question. So what I'll do is I can see I've got an attendee list here who have been on the webinar. And so what I'll do is I'll send an email out with links to that so that you'll be able to just download those. Those are PDFs. They're easy for us to you'll just be able to click and download. So there's 2 worksheets actually that showed. One is the customer pain worksheet, which focuses on helping you with your conversations, having those strategic priorities. And the second worksheet was around the pilot programs. So I'll send those in an email. You just be able to click download. So good question. Thanks. And also I see, thanks for booking that call. I just saw you booked a call as well, Ms. Seema. So looking forward to that conversation. Again, for those of you, like I said, if you're at all interested in getting some more help beyond what we talked about here, then go ahead and grab that time on my calendar so that we can make sure we get a chance. So another question here is, with the pilot programs, I was just assuming that they would be paid. I was just assuming they were going to be paid. And the answer is yes, absolutely. No more free trials, right? If you're doing free trials, then typically what that means is, and this is maybe where I'm being more direct than people like, usually when I see a startup doing free trial, it's because they're afraid to sell. When companies use free trials, it's because they're afraid to sell. It feels good to go, oh, we set up this free trial, or oh, this person's interested, or oh, look, we have somebody who signed up. They signed up for the free trial. So now we have a certain number of users, or we have a certain number of schools that have signed up for the free trial. The problem is there's that cost of free, right? There's a cost to you that you have to support them. And a lot of times it's like, pulling that horse to water that doesn't want to drink, right? They're like, yeah, I signed up for the free trial, but I'm really busy. And because the customer, the prospective customer, doesn't have any skin in the game, then if, I know I had a 2-week free trial, or I know I could use one experiment for free, and I just didn't get a chance to use it. It's like, yeah, it was free, right? So by forcing ourselves to require payment for the pilot, what that does is a couple things. It crosses that penny gap, and most importantly, it forces us in a lot of cases, if we're selling to an elementary school teacher or a high school teacher or a university professor, like it forces us as the salesperson to go find that executive level relationship that might be able to fund that pilot project. And again, the pilot, it doesn't have to be a large amount of money. If you're thinking about selling a platform for $100,000 or even $1 million to a school, the pilot can be $10,000. The pilot can be $1,000. The pilot could be $100, right? The idea is crossing that penny gap, getting procurement involved, getting an executive involved, forcing that high-low collaboration, being in the middle, right? Showing that there's real investment on the outcome, and also showing the value that you're creating with your product. Because those pilot products we talked about was not just about, hey, here's the product, you're going to pay for it and use it. It's getting involved, right? It's the concierge white glove service, It's getting your hands dirty. It's making sure that you're helping that professor or teacher be successful as they're getting things set up. It's making sure that you're there on site if you need to help them use the product. It's giving them reports and analytics. So you've got key metrics that give you the proof you need to then go and roll it out to the rest of the organization. So, if you're doing free trials, I would strongly, strongly suggest focusing instead on getting paid pilots. And while, maybe you get 10 free trials every week, people signing up, and maybe you only get one pilot per month that's paid, better for your business, right? Especially if you're early stage, you've got to prove that people are willing to pay for this thing. So have a really clear plan on how to, and a really clear value for that pilot program. That way you feel confident in what you're charging, okay? Cool. Any other questions? Any other questions? Those are two really good ones. I'm glad that we covered those. Take a look here. Erica, thank you. That's all you also set up. Great. We'll cover those strategies for you. Good stuff. Any other questions that we want to cover today? Here's one more. So I talked about in the beginning with the strategic priorities, focusing on strategic priorities, like what's the course of action to actually engage that conversation with the executive, right? Because let's say we set up our website in our company that we're getting inbound leads from teachers or people that would be responsible for implementing our product, right? We're getting those inbound leads, but we don't necessarily have access to this top level executives, administrators, deans, principals, whatever that is. How do we talk to those people? How do we get involved with those conversations? How do we get them to listen to us, right? And so a lot of that focuses on, I go back to this idea of finding documentation, figuring out what are the strategic priorities, whether that's through a state level report, looking at any curriculum changes, any changes in regulations around an education system, or if it's a private, maybe it's a private school and they're expanding, that would be a strategic priority and maybe a reason to use technology. What you want to do is approach those executives based on what their view of the world is. And their view of the world is, my job as an executive is to implement these strategies, is to both create strategies and implement those. So when you're approaching them, it's never about your product. I mentioned to sell the problem, not the product. And so when you're approaching those executives, that's where doing a little bit of homework ahead of time, saying, let's say John Smith is a dean at a business school. You go, hey John, one of the things I was reading about was how your business program has been expanding to reach international students, particularly in the Asian market. And one of the things that we've done is really been focusing on working with MBA programs just like yours to help those Asian students be successful, because when they're successful, a couple of things happen. One, your retention rate is going up because you don't have to worry about students dropping out after the first year or after the first semester, right? That's a business problem that John, the dean, cares about. Secondly, we're going to make sure that those students are more successful in the entire curriculum throughout the whole 2 years that they're in the program. So instead of just skirting by and skating by and just like barely getting C's in the class, because their English skills are better using our platform, they're going to get, maybe have a chance to get a B or even an A in some of these classes, because it's not that they can't understand the concepts, it's just that maybe their language isn't good enough. Maybe their skills aren't good enough in order to actually, show what they know in these tests. And then thirdly, when those few graduates graduate, they're going to get better jobs